Buonasera and welcome. Welcome to the School of Transnational Governance here at the European University Institute and to this important event on the Constitution of Innovation. My name is Johanna Meyer and I am the director of the School of Transnational Governance. We meet at the critical moment for Europe. How can Europe maintain an innovative, prosperous, and open society? Well, some of you might say this is not really a new question. And we are not here only to hear answers. We really need to get into an action mode. The manifesto we are launching here today is directly speaking to this. The Constitution of Innovation reminds us that innovation is not only about new technology and startups. It is about the rules of the game, the way we design markets, the way we manage fragmentation, and the way we uphold legal certainty and long-term prosperity. This is exactly the kind of debates the STG is excited to host. Our school is a place where policymakers, scholars, and practitioners come together to test ideas, to challenge assumptions, and to build bridges between analysis and actions on those issues that we are truly consequential for Europe's future. I'm also delighted that this event is the result of close cooperation between the Florence School of Transnational Governance, the Department of Law, and the Dynamic Competition Initiative, which shows how the EUI's intellectual community can work together on questions that cut across disciplines and policy fields. With this, let me thank you once again for joining us here and online. And it is now my pleasure to hand over to Fabrizio Tassinari, Executive Director of the School of Transnational Governance, who will guide us through the program and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna, and a warm welcome from me as well to the School of Transnational Governance and Palazzo Buontalenti. As Johanna just said, this is exactly the type of conversations that we like to host, and we are especially happy to do this with our friends from the Law Department, the Dynamic Competition Initiative. Still, you will appreciate, for me personally, it's going to be quite a daunting task because it's a long panel, very distinguished, and I can see in the room just as a distinguished audience. So I will just get cracking immediately. I am quite sure you're all familiar with the oral parable about the frog that doesn't notice the water heating. If you place a frog inside a pot of cold water, the water warms up slowly, and the frog fails to notice until it is too late. Now, I don't know if this is what Draghi has in mind when he thinks and speaks about the slow agony, but it is reminiscent of that, and that unless the EU and its member states revise, reform, and perhaps turn around the conditions, institutions, even foundations of competitiveness and innovation in Europe, the decline is destined to be slow and painful. And it is timely to have this discussion today. This was not by design, but it so happens that Draghi and his compatriot Letta next week are invited to an informal meeting of heads of states and governments in Belgium. So we are in a position to present this manifesto in a very timely fashion. So without further ado, since the panel is very distinguished and long, let me go quickly to introduce both our panelists and our discussants. On my right, you have the distinguished authors of the Constitution of Innovation, Professor Luis Garicano from the London School of Economics, Before that, many other things, among them member of European Parliament for Renew. So welcome, Louis, and great you could make it from London. On my right, our great colleague and friend, Nicolas Petit, professor at the Law Department and head of the Law Department. Online somewhere is in the air Professor Bengt Holmström, emeritus at there you are. Emeritus at MIT, a Nobel Prize winner for economics, and if you allow me, most importantly, senior fellow at the School of Transnational Governance. Since the panel is long, I will introduce it now so that then I can give you the word immediately. Let me just say, this is exactly the kind of thing that we try to do here. I would call the conversation that will take place later a stakeholder analysis or a stakeholder stress test on the manifesto. And it will be analyzed, discussed, and questioned from different disciplinary but also professional perspectives. So on my left is my great friend and colleague, Professor George Papakonstantinou, Professor of International Political Economy here at the school, as well as former Finance Minister of Greece, among many other things. Further to my left, Dr. Lucia Aleotti, a great pleasure to welcome you here at the school, board member of the Menarini Group, pharmaceutical, and vice president of Confindustria, which is the Confederation of Industries here in Italy, with focus on economic research department. You had the economic research department. Further to the left, the Honorable Dario Nardella, member of the European Parliament, and before that, mayor of the city for nearly a decade, and also in your case, a great friend of this place. So great to have you back, Dario. And so great that you brought here the students of your academia, so they are all here to cheer you, I guess. Further to the left, Mr. Erkki Liikanen, former governor of the Bank of Finland, former commissioner and minister in Finland, that will provide a Nordic perspective, I suppose. The rest of us are mostly from Southern Europe. And finally, but not least, we thought precisely to give a full flavor Poliana, who is a policy leader fellow here at the STG from Brazil, and with a focus on innovation. And we look forward to hearing from you. Without further ado, I think, Louis, the floor is yours. Mike.
It's a pleasure to be here. I have some slides, so I hope they can go up there. We have Bengt Holmström online, as you heard, who's also Nordic, and Nicolas Petit here. So the three of us are going to talk. Nicolas and me will talk on the first round, Bengt and Nicolas on the second, and me and Bengt, I think, on the third. I think that's the plan. What we're going to do is not going to be neither, oh, we just need a federation of European nations and that's the end of the story, nor, oh, we need a Europe of nations. So you'll find it difficult to put us in a box, and I think that's a good thing. So I want you to, especially those of you who are younger in the room, to think back from 2050. Okay, so you're in 2050 today, you're in Florence. In Florence, nothing changed for 400 years, so I guess why would it change in the next 25? So without growth, we are just a huge amusement park for rich foreigners. Our welfare state is kind of unsustainable because we have more and more old people, and we haven't managed to put a defense together. You know, today, after all this mess in Ukraine, we don't have any single person making any decisions on defense. We have the dreaded, as somebody said recently, committee trying to make interoperable the shells. We don't have one shell, we have 11 shells. They're going to put them together. So Europe proving unable to defend themselves. But what we want to say is we believe that an alternative future is possible, that there is no reason that Europe, which was until very recently the most innovative continent in the world, even as late as the 70s, Europe, if you think of Airbus, of the trains, of the nuclears, most technologies of the cars, most technologies that were there in the 70s, we were the leading continent. It was only with information technology revolution that we got behind. And I'm not going to give you the numbers for the EU-US GDP per capita gap. It's very large, but you know that it's particularly a problem for Italy, which has basically spent more than a quarter of a century with no growth. If you look just at the big companies in Europe, and you look at their market cap, and you look at their other R&D spend, you see that in the US, all the big companies are tech, and they're all recent. In Europe, some of them are tech. We have Novo Nordisk is a pharma SAP, but we also have several which are kind of doing handbags and not really doing any R&D. If you look at the R&D numbers, I was updating the numbers, but I didn't have the time to send it. You saw that the techs fell this morning big time because they announced, the big techs, they announced their new budget for 2026. The Financial Times says only the 4 biggest are spending $660 billion to train their models next year. $660 billion. Compare on the left with what Europe spends, countries, entire countries, everybody. Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Sweden. If you compare it with the 2026, I have there the 24 numbers. It's more or less half of what just Amazon alone is going to spend in R&D. Amazon alone is going to spend twice as much as all those governments together. So, I mean, there is some evidence. I have a blog that I'm putting there for you to look, Silicon Continent. There is quite a bit of evidence of sclerosis. I don't want to rehash it. Mario Draghi did a great job at the report with the regulatory burden, big compliance costs, the single market failure. There's a lot of dispute about those numbers from the IMF, 45% equivalent tariff. It's clear that trade between EU countries is less than half the trade between the European states, the US states. So there is clearly a lot of barriers that persist, and there is a big innovation gap. Draghi has this famous fact that no EU company worth over 100 billion was founded in the last 50 years, compared to a gigantic amount of American ones. And now there's one, which is Spotify. Just 6% of the global AI startup funding is going to EU companies. So I think this is diagnosed and overdiagnosed. As I think it was Joanna who said, there's been a very big round of reports. I think we quote in the Constitution, we quote 40 years of reports, maybe more, maybe from the late 80s, the first one on the single market, the Cecchetti report. So a lot of reports saying that Europe is not managing. We don't believe that external shocks, demographics, or lack of state investment are the problem. We believe that there is some systemic problems, and we believe that it has to do with regulation over growth, and that's kind of the diagnosis of Draghi as well. We want to kill two metaphors. Okay, words matter, and there are two ideas that I think are very damaging. The first one is Jacques Delors' idea based on Monet that the EU is a bicycle, that if it doesn't pedal forward, it falls. Okay, so we just have to pedal and pedal and pedal. Okay, the truth of the matter is, yes, we've pedaled forward, and yes, different crises have pushed us to continue doing things. But sometimes you got to wonder, where is the bike going? Okay, you're pedaling towards the precipice, you're pedaling towards the wall. Sometimes you have to stop, and we think that we're pedaling up the mountain of bureaucracy, and that it's really exhausting entrepreneurs and stopping initiative. We believe, this is Bengt's view of the world, and I think it's a correct view, that there is a new metaphor that is needed. It's not a bicycle, it's a house. We need to, when you're in a house, you're building a house, sometimes you have to throw some walls, sometimes you need to make new ones, you need to make them stronger. You need a blueprint, you need to think, you're not just going forward kind of with your bike moving at full speed, but you're going to make deliberate improvements. The second idea that we really think is very damaging is the Brussels effect. This idea is the idea that Europe is the regulator to the world. It comes from the California effect in the US. We're going to set up some rules, everybody's going to say, oh, we want a European market, so they're going to just follow us, okay? We think the reality is that this is wrong, this is not working. Clearly not, maybe in farming products, who knows, maybe we're big enough for that. We're not big enough for AI, etc. And what we're doing is we're placing huge burdens on the path of our companies, and I have lots of articles on this that you can see in my blog on GDPR, on AI Act, on all of this. And at the end of the day, the big American companies, they can comply. They have lots of lawyers. This is not bothering Elon Musk or Meta. This is bothering our little entrepreneurs who have to comply with GDPR until the end of times, and they don't have the lawyers of the ability to figure out what it means. So it's clear that this Brussels effect is not translated into prosperity. We think that we need a new set of principles. I'm not going to go over them carefully because I don't obviously have the time. I've been given 10 minutes. But the principles that we believe Europe has to live by are entry over incumbency, the way we do industrial policy, the way we do innovation policy. What's happening with the defense money that has been freed up now? Is it going to all these startups? No. It's being captured by existing Rheinmetall and friends to do more tanks and more shells. Is that the kind of war for which we are unprepared and we have to fight in the future? Don't we need the big enablers, the big disruptors, the drones, all these things? In Europe, industrial policy is about protecting Fiat and not about protecting the new, who knows, little engineer who is right now in his basement dreaming a new car. Diversity over uniformity. We believe that there is an obsession with harmonization. The biggest lesson I got in Parliament is the following. I went to the College of Europe. Okay, I was a civil servant in the European Union before I did my PhD. I've been reading about Europe all my life. I didn't know this. Okay, maybe you're going to think I was stupid. Harmonization does not harmonize. We put a directive in place. I voted many of these. You put a directive in place, and you think, oh, now the rules are more equal than before the directive, right? That's kind of why we put a directive. Wrong. You put a directive, and it gets implemented in different directions by different countries. There is actual evidence, for example, on capital markets, that post-directive, the level of harmonization is lower than pre-directive in capital markets. Not only that, but you create an additional layer without removing the previous one. Think of stock market regulators. Think of GDPR. We get a new regulator at national level, at regional level, at European level. We have 250 digital regulators. So instead of trying to uniformize, which we don't manage, okay, we're not going to negotiate anything that is a true harmonization because we can't, because we're 27 countries. Why don't we leave the national rules compete? We have a principle, Cassis de Dijon. It says that there is mutual recognition in Europe. If something can be sold in Florence, it can be sold in Brussels. Instead, what we do is, no, nothing that is sold in Florence can be sold in Brussels because there are all these exceptions. Fourth, innovation for precaution. I think the precautionary Europe principle has gone too far in Europe. Let me give you one example. I know, like, Europeans are paranoid about everything. Corn, genetic modified plants in Europe are basically ruled out in every case. There's only one exception. There's one seed that is allowed in Spain and Portugal. That's the only modified seed that exists in Europe right now. This is true for everything from corn to self-driving cars. I mean, Florence doesn't have Uber. I mean, I'm sure somebody had a safety reason to not have Uber. Trade-offs, no free lunches. I was in Parliament when Ursula von der Leyen came explaining us that the Green New Deal was not only going to be great climate policy, but was going to create lots of jobs. Sorry, if you raise the price of electricity, you're not creating lots of jobs. It's not a problem, okay? Maybe we are worried about climate change. I am, okay? I am ready to pay a price, and I'm ready to support those policies. What you cannot tell us is that that's for free, okay? Not only for free, but it's going to create new jobs. Well, everything European businesses are doing now is replacing existing capital. That means you're not increasing your ability to produce, you're just replacing. You're not creating a new train line, you're making the old train weather compliant, climate compliant. You're not creating a new road, you're making it compliant, etc., etc. Now, we have some concrete proposals that I won't elaborate. We think we have too many objectives. Is that what Americans call the everything bagel? Every proposal of the European Union has to have 25 objectives, and it makes everything really not achieve any goal. We think growth should be coming to the fore. We think directives have to go for the reason I told you, and we think we should have regulations. We think that there should be a new layer of courts, which is the federal commercial courts. You're a French firm trying to sell in Italy, and there is some stupid Italian rule that doesn't allow you to sell. You have to go to the Italian court to enforce what you want to do. That's going to take 3 years, and the Italian court has no European Union law, so it's going to maybe refer it. There should be a possibility for private enforcement. You are in French business, want to sell in Italy, the Italian authorities not let you. Let's go to a federal court. That's why I tell you, it's not going back on Europe. In many aspects, it's going forward, okay? 28th regime, we think that there should be a single set of EU business laws. We are very worried with what's happening in Europe. The 28th regime is probably going to be directive. So we're going to have 27 28th regimes, which is not a recipe for success. We already have a Société Européenne Anonyme from 2000. It didn't do anything, so we shouldn't reproduce that. We think laws should come with automatic expiration, and we want to rely on existing institutions. Overall, what we want in this new house is Europe should do much less. We shouldn't try to do at the European Union level, the geopolitical Europe. It's not going to work. Maybe some coalitions of the willing, the Nordics, maybe the Southerns have other things to do. Europe should do as the European Union much less, but do the one thing it was created to do much, much better. A real single market that allows our entrepreneurs to scale up and to grow without barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luis. I would now give the floor to Bengt, if you can hear us and see us. It was Bengt, it's okay. And by the way, Uber now is available in Rome because the Pope said that it was needed for the Holy Year. So maybe there's a lesson there for Europe. Yeah, if the Pope says it, then maybe we can do it. Bengt, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for coming to listen to our document. I'm going to try to focus on something very narrow, which is on the AI problem. It's massive. Let me start by reading what Eric Smith from Google, former Google CEO, says. If Europe doesn't build its own open source alternative to the Chinese and the American basically not if we don't choose an own road between the US and China, we are going to be squeezed on the US side. Its licenses, we are going to have to pay. We already pay high licenses, and on the Chinese side, we probably are always a little wary about how far they can be trusted, though they have an open source style arrangement. So his recommendation is that we should focus on something of our own desire and be proud of it. Now, that's easier said than done because we know that we are massively behind both China and the US. And the situation hasn't gotten any easier with the geopolitical problems that we have right now. And so we can be left in the dirt pretty badly if we don't do something. So I very much support the view that I didn't support a year ago, but now support that Europe really has to find its own way, and doesn't mean it has to be isolationist, but it has to have alternatives to balance off, the threats both from China and from the US. So it's a difficult situation to start with. So this is the predicament. Euro, I should say that there has been a lot of positive things happening in the terms of the AI, the startup communities has been very vibrant this year. At least I have seen it from Finland, but also elsewhere. So it's a great deal of excitement in Europe, but the thing we are emphasizing here is that we have to have architecture to support that. we have a massive fragmentation problem when it comes to something to support that startup enthusiasm. And the startup communities in the different countries have different rules, and they don't transfer to different countries. This is the problem that I want to say a few words about. It is good that Europe should focus on the application layer, and in some sense that has been accepted more broadly now. So the threat of having these massive LLMs on left and right, but not having it here in Europe is less of an issue. So the thing, it was already mentioned that we have a issue with the regulation and such. I think the problem is that the regulation, I wouldn't say that we have to remove necessarily the regulations, but the big problem with it is missing the half of the regulation, which is how to support growth. I mean, there's barely any regulation to actually be pro-growth as opposed to, don't do this, don't do that, and so on. So this focus from the individual side, I mean, anybody who understands externalities and trying to get a community of innovation in Europe understands that you don't start by putting restrictions of everybody from the point of view of protecting individuals. I don't know what happened to Europe that it has become so totally devoted to the individual. We are a group of countries, and we have to think about a lot of these problems from the point of view of externalities that can be internalized in some clever and good regulations. So that's an addition to what we just heard from Luis. But I want to go to. I mean, we could talk a lot about startups are at the center of this, because we have to have created destruction, yes, but we also have to have really innovation, and we have to have a channel to get. And we know what the problem is, that we can't scale them up. But Europe, the EU has started to work on this problem, as I understand it. I'm not that well informed, but the Commission has set out a call for a process to actually come up with something that reduces the fragmentation and somehow comes to a unified set of rules that will take out the frictions that we have in the startup community, so that across the countries. I want to put a very kind of radical idea on the table just to wake you up. I think this whole idea that the startup, that this new big startup design is sort of organized by the Commission is in some sense antithetical to innovation. The innovation doesn't reside in Brussels. And that applies, and this is the main point here, that applies to what kind of, say, 28th regime or other regime do we really want to have? And so what I'm proposing to say a few words about is in order to come up with a code, the word usually that's used here is EU Inc., meaning it's a sort of, it's kind of like a Delaware code in the US or something like that. There is no such code right now, but coming up with that code is the objective of the basically one of the objectives of the Commission's initiative. But I think that code should come from the users. We should engage the community of innovators to actually innovate the code, not to supervise the code or control the code from Brussels. So that's my sort of suggestion, that we would somehow engage not just call for proposals and have the Brussels sort of negotiate in a directive style, back and forth, and eventually pick something or have some harmonization, but rather set up a sort of a game or a mechanism whereby these actual users could participate. So let me just say a few of the steps that could be done. I think it would be, say, a coalition of the willing. There would be a call for a coalition of willing to participate in a pilot for coming up with a new code, a new code for this EU Inc. And there will be a second stage where there is an open protocol competition. So it's not Brussels telling how this is going to happen, but Brussels has a minimal set of guidelines. But these communities, in some sense, anybody, founders, venture capitalists, lawyers, academics, can engage in sort of proposing what they think is important for this. And these proposals would be published, and then from there would be revised sandboxes that would sort of compete for, being, and then you would run these sandboxes to see how actual entrepreneurs and companies would be using this proposed. They get to choose whichever sandbox they have, but they would then be running it, and then there would be some transparent evaluation. So I'm reading from a longer sort of list that I written down, but the underlying idea is bring the entrepreneurs in to actually have a voice in what they like, and for also users to see what they like in terms of a functioning code. I think this would be at least, and maybe late in the game, but I think this would be something that would be innovative in itself and at least worth a try. So that's not really what is in our document right now, but I just wanted, but it's certainly conforming with what the document says.
Thank you so much, Bengt. So you went indeed further than the report itself to make the case that innovation doesn't reside in Brussels. Let me take the first soundbite, and the second would be to bring in the entrepreneurs in how you build the code. Okay, so now we heard from two of the three authors, or the three tenors, as they have been dubbed in the popular media. Still have to figure out who is Pavarotti in this. But let's move to the discussants, and I would start with you, George, because you have promised a few of us that you would have a contrarian view. So this would be the time for you to voice it.
All right, thanks a lot. Yes, I have been cast in the contrarian role here, which is not particularly easy, given the three authors, and I love all three of them. Bengt is a towering figure in economics. Nicola has done fantastic work on dynamic competition, and Luis brings not just his academic credentials, but also his experience and frustration from the European Parliament into this work. You can actually read it in the lines as you read it. So. What I'm going to try and do is address three things. One, is the diagnosis right? Luis says we all agree. I will diverge a little bit. Is the prescription correct? And I was missing out some essential elements, and I'm going to try and do this in 5 minutes. So let's start with the diagnosis. And I think it resonates with all of us. Europe is not innovating. The number of firms, the market cap, all that is true. But then, I read the text, and I read Europe is getting poorer. The EU has abandoned economic integration. Europe must adopt a single-minded focus on prosperity, do less but do better. Right. So is Europe getting poorer? No, it's not. Between 1980 and 2024, GDP per capita in Europe has doubled. Doubled. 97, 98% compared to how it was. If we compare with the US, different decades, 1980s, we are at 2.1 per year, US is 2.3. 1990s, we're at 1.95, US is 2.2. 2000s, we're at 1.1, US is 0.8, so we did better. 2010s, 1.4, US 1.6. 2020s were much lower, 1% versus 1.8%, which can be ascribed to the AI boom. And there's a huge question mark about whether this is the biggest asset misallocation in history, but that we will see. And it's an interesting discussion to go into the different layers of the AI pyramid that Bengt started talking about in terms of, the energy, the chips, the data centers, the language models, the application, to see where Europe should be doing more. Then the next question is it only about GDP? Should we only be looking at GDP per capita? Well, I see nothing wrong about talking about the European way of life, which is something that in the beginning of the document provocatively, and the document, let me just say, the document is on purpose provocative. It's a pamphlet, so I'm going to be provocative back, right? Because otherwise, what's the fun? They do say, why do we worry about these things? Well, the EU not only has grown pretty much as the US, a little bit less, but also we have better indices on every quality of life index that you can think of. Life expectancy, inequality, poverty, infant mortality, homicides. And frankly, in the current environment, do we really want to put the US as the benchmark? On different levels, from the economy to society to, the way we run our countries. So that's, the core argument is that Europe's lagging has to do with overregulation. And there, exhibit number 1 is this famous, I'm exaggerating, is this famous IMF study with the number of 44% internal barriers in goods and 110% in services. These are nonsensical numbers. They come out from a gravity trade model. It is a residual which lumps together preferential differences across countries with true barriers. You cannot interpret these as tariff equivalents. It is as the way that Donald Trump interpreted, basically, the deficit between the US and other countries as being a tariff equivalent. It is similarly nonsensical, and it is a shame that this has found itself in speeches by van der Leyen, in the Draghi Report. But there are a number of studies that show that these numbers are way over what the true situation is. It is true that trade between EU states is much less than between US states, and this is because we're not a country. We're a continent with varying preferences, and this has got to be reflected in the data. Is EU level regulation only about economic integration? That's the next question. And my answer is no, it shouldn't be. I mean, what about safety? What about human rights, environmental protection, labor rights? Should not this be EU level regulation? Is GDPR really the reason why we have very low venture capital in Europe? Is the AI Act really the reason why we're not investing in AI in Europe? Are we putting on regulation and the incomplete internal market, which we all agree it is, and we need to do much more on it, many other things which are kind of the missing elements in the narrative, things like the macroeconomic regime, the EMU design, the fact that we don't have capital markets that are integrated, that we do not have an EU fiscal asset, that we have issues with demography and labor supply, which the US does not have, that we have issues with energy, geography, with our terms of trade, with our finance and risk profiles. All these things are important elements of an answer, and I think it defeats a little bit the purpose to put everything on regulation. Now, having said all this, when I turn to the prescription, I think that all the suggestions are in the right direction. I think there are an incomplete set, and I gave some examples of other things which I would have liked to have seen, but certainly specialized commercial courts, the automatic field preemption, the 28th regime, reforming legislative practice, all of these are in the right direction. I have a question mark on the elimination of the usage of directives, both because some of these is, the requirement is in the treaties, but also because regulations are much harder politically to do than directives many times, so whether that will move or not is an issue. as well as on the automatic field preemption, where it hinges on a trade-off. Basically, states would have to trade their legal sovereignty for a more restrained EU. They do this in the short term with a more restrained EU in the long term, so that's a difficult one. So, to conclude and not take too much of my time. This is an extremely important document, and I'm very glad it starts a discussion. I think that its prescriptions, I would happily subscribe to all of them with asterisks here and there. I think it is important to read it for what it is, which is a call in arms. And when you discuss with the authors and when you look at the slides, it's clear that they have in mind much more a broader set of things than what they do. But I think that sometimes the way of framing it as Europe should do less but better, and we are over-regulating, defeats the purpose of trying to move a policy in the right direction. And I leave it at that.
Thank you so much, George. Thanks for this plea for not throwing the baby with the bathwater. Now you can go back to be nice, because I would give the floor and the mic to you have it, to Lucia. Then we are very keen and eager, Lucia, to hear the view from industry. How do you look from your perch of the issue of innovation and competitiveness in Europe? The floor is yours.
So I'm going to speak for 2 hours, if this is the subject. No, the point is that the situation for companies who want to be competitive in the global environment and are based in Europe is simply terrible. Sorry, Professor, but I have to disagree completely with what you say. Because if we see the trend of GDP in the last years, we see a kind of rule of the double. So where we have been growing roughly 2.5%, the US have been growing the double, and China has been growing the triple. So 2.5, 5, and 8%, while previous years China was growing even more. Are we a poor continent? Not, we are not. We are not yet. Because the trends and the figures are really difficult to sustain in the long term. Debt are growing, and we need those who can repay debt. I give you just one figure from Italian Confindustria. Companies which are above 10 employees pay in Italy for 83% of the whole welfare, schools, pension, health, companies and their employees. So the need to have large companies which can compete with companies around the world is not just the desire of an entrepreneur who wants to make its work, which is growing the company, having more employees, but it's also a substantial need, a fundamental need if we want to have schools, pensions, and health. The point I like very much in this paper is the example of the house, the fact that it needs some maintenance, and it needs to throw down walls. I think it is urgent to start throwing down walls. All the regulations that have put burdens on companies are not, unfortunately, only the ones that have been mentioned here. There are a number of points which are incredible. If I tell you something about my sector, which is pharmaceuticals, okay, we want more drugs for our health, and everyone likes innovation. Great. So a company should go innovate, but then when it comes to the return on innovation, here we are. Nobody wants to spend money on pharmaceuticals, but the price of a drug is the return for the innovation for a new drug. So all the debate that is going on also with President Trump on the cost of pharmaceutical in the US versus Europe, where he says that US are paying for innovation in pharma worldwide, has a point of truth. Europe has regulated that intellectual property on pharmaceuticals should be shorter than in the US. Then countries can negotiate and obtain lower prices. Good. So the final return on innovation is lower. If the final return on innovation is lower, we have less money to reinvest on innovation. And guess what? Then our drugs are used by people. And health regulators say what is not absorbed by your body to solve your problem has to be sent out. Europe invented a tax to be paid by companies on wee-wee, because it is going to in the water, and what is happening to the fish. Another tax. Do Chinese companies have this tax? No. Do US companies have this tax? No. Shorter IP protection, taxes, lower prices of sales. So, are we competitive with Chinese and US companies? No, we are not. And in fact, patents from EU companies are down from 31% to 20%. Chinese companies are up from 12 to 28. American companies are up from 31 to 34%. So this is the real world evidence that something is not going in the right direction. And if we don't start to really focus on making Europe a great industrial platform and a great innovative platform, which means we need industry, we are going to, little by little, lose our capacity of being wealthy citizens and healthy citizens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lucia, for this reality check from industry, and I'm sure there will be counterpoints coming maybe from some of our discussions later on. We move on for the first block with Dario, and before introducing you, Dario, I cannot help pointing out that your manifesto was published, I went and checked, on the 11th of November, and that was 2 days before the European Parliament approved the omnibus package. Yeah. And, you know, I don't think that was designed like that, but I couldn't help when I reviewed your report for my newspaper in Italy, largely positive, to wonder whether the agenda, as worthy as it is, could be hijacked in the way that then it ended up being hijacked in Brussels. Dario, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to discuss with you. First of all, I would say that my first impression about this manifesto, that you write on November exactly, so it's that after Draghi's speech you have to change, to update the manifesto, because there are many other input to insert in the manifesto, especially about the political diagnosis, because I think this constitution of innovation is not only about technologies, market, capital, is also about institutions. No? When we talk about innovation, we should consider the political aspect and institutional aspect. for your question on the omnibus package. So I see a big problem in this omnibus strategy from European Commission, which is the cultural approach. So the largest cultural approach in Europe, when you are facing a problem, an issue, is to make a new rule. This is my experience also as a mayor. I remember in my experience as mayor here in Florence, with my collaborators, when my colleagues had new issues, they often told me, we have a new issue, we need a new rule. And this cultural approach is coming from a French administrative model. We have a civil law system, not common law system. And the 19th century administrative French system influenced a lot Italy, and then Spain, and then all South Europe, and also Germany. So our approach is to regulate everything. If we have a new challenge, new issue, we need a new rule. The cultural approach is not to find a solution with the existing rules, with the ongoing jurisdictional system you have. So if we are not aware about this cultural approach, we risk to find weak solutions, weak strategy. And that's what I'm seeing on the omnibus. So now we have at least 10 omnibus package, one for digital, for agriculture, for chemical system, omnibus for automotive, omnibus for environment, omnibus for competitiveness, omnibus for horizon, innovation, etc. Is more or less 14, 15 is an impact on 14, 15 legislations. So let's think how many rules are in these 10 omnibus packages. So it's not a simplification, it's a rewriting. It's very different. If you need simplification, you should remove rules, not add new rules or rewrite the existing rules. Indeed, we are using a lot of our energy and space to face all those proposals coming from European Commission. Why? Because the approach is to regulate. Indeed, we have a huge technical and bureaucratic machine in Brussels, so you have to use this machine. So we should change the cultural vision. If we have challenges, if we have issues, we need to use the existing rules because we have enough rules. And more legislation does not automatically mean more integration. This is another question. Are you sure that more legislation means more European integration? No, we are not sure about it. That's why I think we need a different approach. We need a different approach which, be careful, not means deregulation, so anarchy, of course, but means more coordination of different national systems. But I have two comments and concerns about this constitution of innovation. One is the slogan, do less but better. So I think we should be clear about the meanings of do less. Because if we consider do less we do not do less Europe, I disagree. So we need more Europe if we consider political Europe. We need more protagonism on a global framework, on global competition. We need more courage to set priorities. We need more accountabilities for results. Or when we talk about legislation, we need more assessment impact, evaluations. Because I often see people who introduce new regulations without any evaluation about the impact. Let's see again the omnibus package. European Commission told us the implementation of omnibus will represent 35% less of bureaucratic costs, compliance costs. Okay, but give me the document, give me the proof, give me the impact assessment. Omnibus package will represent 12 billion euros less for companies. Okay, but where is the impact assessment? So one of the principles that we should adopt in Brussels is that you must do an impact assessment whenever you are introducing a new legislation. No rules without evaluation. Otherwise, you risk to have a big delta, a big difference from real economy and theoric legislation. And the second, and I'm finishing. The second question is, but this is another concept that I have. When you talk about diversity over uniformity, what do you mean exactly? Because you said, let national rules compete instead of one rule for everyone. But be careful. No, because if you let national rules, you are not sure that you have more simplification, because we are talking about European bureaucracy, but let's talk about Italian bureaucracy, or French bureaucracy, or German regulation. So are we sure that national regulations are more simple than European regulation? This is another question. So let's. I'm curious to know something more about this principle, diversity over uniformity, because don't forget that we are Europe. Do you know who is the most important kingmaker in Europe? Not European Parliament, unfortunately. Not European Commission. It's European Council. And European Council are national governments. Are national governments, okay, but European Council has the power to change bureaucracy and the technical sector. So the challenge is for national governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dario. And of course, a counterfactual, or rather a confirmation of your point, is that the omnibus in November was voted thanks to the support of the far right, which generally wants less Europe rather than more Europe. Yeah.
Exactly. This is the risk.
All right. So now, Nicolas, the script is that Nicolas will try to take on these three questions. So you got the hardest job of that.
Sure. I think I get it covered, and then Luis will fill the blanks. So George says, it's great to be here, by the way. George says it's not as bad as we say. That's what he says. And then he says, plus, this is us, we're ready to take a little less growth in exchange for, more welfare state, more Prosecco, and so on. The problem is, it's not a message. The message we have is, as Lucia, I think, properly understood it, is that this is not sustainable. So it's going to work for a couple more years, but it's not going to work for a long time. Now, I think, besides the macro discussion on GDP, which we know is a discussion that we didn't trigger, it's been there for a long time. I think we think that the superiority of the Draghi and Letta evidence-based is that it tied these macroeconomic observations to devastating microeconomic findings about what's going on in the real life of businesses, large and small. And it's all over the place in the Draghi Report. All this survey evidence, all this data at the firm level, at the subsidiary level, at the unit level, that indeed firms struggle to scale in Europe, to diversify, and to create the new products and services that will give the growth needed to drink Prosecco. So I think that is why we believe we have a stronger evidence base than ever. If you don't believe in that, you just need to look around in your daily life, right? So my wife is a lawyer in Brussels, and her specialty is consumer credit. It's a Europeanized, completely Europeanized, harmonized field. Until a recent time, most of our work was looking at credit contracts for banks, of course, the evil players in the economy, and advising them on whether this complied with European regulation on consumer credits. Since about 5 to 6 years, most of our work today is no longer about advising on European consumer credit legislation, but it's about advising on GDPR, on the AI Act, and on AML, anti-money laundering legislation. This is a huge distraction on her time and a huge gain for the law firm, but certainly not for the businesses she advises. Well, last but not least, of course, what we saw 2 weeks ago in the context of, in parallel to the Davos summit, is also real evidence that Europe doesn't have scale and Europe doesn't have agency on its future, right? We are not price setters, we are price takers. And this is what we see every day on TV. So I don't think you can really question this. I mean, it's all over the place, and there's certainly no grounding to sort of, come start and say, hey, your GDP unit data, it's just, 0.6 incorrect. I think that will not carry us any further. Okay, the second point that I want to make is to come back on what Dario said, because there's one way to read this manifesto, which I think we didn't intend, and we certainly do not want to leave this impression in the future. This is emphatically not a deregulation agenda. It is a rational regulation agenda. So we welcome, I want to say this very clearly, we welcome EU-wide common rules if they meet 3 conditions. Condition number 1, real regulation over directives, and not fake regulations that are de facto directives. I studied digital market regulation, DSA, DMA, AI Act, and so on. They're all regulations, but they all have exemption clauses that allow the member states to develop their own mini DMA, mini DSA, mini AI Act. And the result is that you have things that are nominally called regulation, but are effectively directives. This is not a rational model of regulation, so that's condition number 1. Well, by the way, we have the same in M&A. Now there's all this discussion about having national M&A control over deals with startups, right? So we used to have a single one-stop shop for merger control, the EU merger regulation. That's one area of exclusive competence of the EU, right? Where the EU really has power. But now you are seeing the proliferation of national M&A control regimes. Why, right? Are you going to file, if you're a startup, are you going to file, you merge with another startup, you're going to file everywhere in Europe. That's wrong, it's just wrong. Second condition, immediate and automatic field preemption. When there's a regulation, national law disappears, excluded. And the court should be extremely strict on that. And 3, just like you said, Dario, life cycle cost-benefit analysis, with sunset clauses that are hardly enforced by courts and agencies. Life cycle, it means you do an impact assessment when you put an instrument in the pipeline in Strasbourg and Brussels. You also do an impact assessment every time there is an amendment that's proposed. The amendments are not subject to serious cost-benefit analysis. And then you just run this through the life cycle, right? And if you don't do that, you don't have rational regulation. So I think that's what I wanted to say. Luis?
So I'm happy that George was happy with our recommendations. I'm happy that he was not happy with our diagnosis. So I will not defend the IMF numbers, but I will tell you the ECB December 25 report on the same numbers. So let me tell you one thing that doesn't require any regression. The EU trade in services between 1999 and 24 rose from 8 to 16%. Great news. How much did it grow with countries outside the EU? From 8 to 16%. The single market made no difference whatsoever to trade in services. The European Central Bank calculates the barriers in this study for different goods and services. And it says, in the quantifying, it says for different, it says for trading goods, 70%, manufacturing, 60%, food products, 110%, coke and petroleum, 110%. Those are the equivalent tariffs they find. For services, it's even worse. So I don't think there's any question, the European single market. It's extremely fragmented, and it goes through lots of, I mean, you know it if you're a little company trying to sell. I mean, just doing the value-added tax in different countries is going to drive you insane. There's no harmonization on that. On GDPR, I'll tell you what we know about GDPR. GDPR appears to reduce, this from my own blog, the number of venture deals in the EU. From the post-GDPR, 26% reduction in number of monthly venture deals, 34% reduction compared to the rest of the world, 31% reduction and data-intensive, particularly data-intensive deals. Early-stage deals, 34% drop. So yes, GDPR, I think there is 15 papers in economics on GDPR. I don't think there's one that has a different finding. It's unusual in economics that all papers find the same thing. GDPR is very heavy on compliance. I think it's very damaging for Europeans to continue to think, oh, the US has all this murder rate and they have guns and they have crazy Trump, we are much better off, and then we don't need to do anything. It is true, the US is insane, okay? And I came back from the US, I was a full professor at Chicago because I prefer Europe, and that's why we're fighting for Europe. Bengt is still there, so I will have to rescue him at some point. But Europe has a serious problem, and the problem is basically we don't have the growth to afford a welfare state. We are not going to be able to afford the increasing pensions obligations and health obligations of our older population. If we don't grow, we are toast, and our nice coffees and nice tapas and nice quality of life will not be, as Nicolas said, sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you, Luis. Now, I give the floor to Erkki. You have a mic. Very good. Yes. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for your paper. On this analysis where you say that the single market doesn't work well enough, I agree. Second, also that Europe needs more dynamism, entry and exit, I agree. On this overburden regulation, possible, but we need always evidence. So I can give some concrete examples there. Because you have two proposals here, use deregulation instead of directive, then follow better what you have been implemented, less more infringements. Give three examples. Actually, George was young minister then when I was responsible for telecom regulation. We had the situation that internet was booming and Europe was late. We had to change the whole legislation. We decided to go to 5 directives instead of 20. Was dramatic. But then we saw that there's missing problem, that's the last mile. Cable from the home to center was owned by the monopolies. If you don't broke that, you will do nothing. We came to the conclusion that we can't give that to directive. It takes 18 months or 3 years or 5 years. We went for regulation. It was adopted by European Parliament, Council of European Parliament, and in later analysis, like Thomas Filippone, who wrote the book The Great Reversal, that was the greatest success, one of the 2 great success stories. It was regulated with one go for everywhere. Wim Kok made a report about famous Lisbon agenda. The conclusion was that it was failure, too many objectives, not good coordination, except the homes, schools, and universities were connected because there was unbundling the local loop. So I said you should always test the regulation possibility. And there are 2-3 good examples there, and that is one. Second, when you say that the prosperity should be the only purpose, I in principle agree, but there are a couple of issues you must remember. You don't produce pharmaceutical products only for prosperity. You want to also take care of the ill people. So that you need, that's why, that's the point. So yes, you can have also other objectives, but you must do assessment to see what is the impact on competitiveness of the industry at the same time. Pharma reform one was done after 2000, had one innovative solution. They proposed that new biotechnological companies can have a European authorization to a new product. It was massive change, very much contested. You know what was the biggest success story in the area? First vaccination against corona. BioNTech Pfizer, that was first vaccination authorized by this legislation. So when you do legislations for good purposes like better health, guarantee that new innovations can be done properly. Pharma, chemicals. I remember when I went to see Olaf Scholz for the first time, I asked him, do you know REACH reform? Because deal was on in Hamburg. Said, yes, actually we discussed yesterday in German government. Why? Because UK leaves the EU, but they want to stay in REACH, in chemical legislation. Why it worked? It worked reasonably well. It's not perfect, but it's very heavy impact assessment analysis, not only health, environment, but also competitiveness. Interestingly, the biggest part which was cut off was animal testing. That was terribly expensive, and animal welfare people didn't like it either. So this impact assessment can be also helpful if you do it properly, but you have also other objectives than prosperity. So I in principle, I'm positive for that regulation should be tested first. If it's not possible, then you see the others. Last point is infringement. When I became commissioner very long ago, 30 years ago, I had a discussion with Jacques Delors. I asked, what are the key tasks for the commissioner? He said, right of initiative and guardian of the treaty. I always remember that. So we have two tasks, very political and then actually legal referee tasks. When I heard a few years ago that one commission said that now we are a political commission, I got very worried. Because if you don't first properly assess what laws are important and necessary, and you don't properly follow up the implementation, you fail. Commission must do both tasks. They must be political in the initiative, but they must be strictly legally minded when they follow the implementation. It's not about political gaming, it's just proper implementation. So I agree with your comment on infringement. In principle also with regulation, it will not be easy run, but it's always worth trying. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Last but definitely not least, Poliana Sintra Monteiro. Let me just say, in these debates, we often have a tendency for navel gazing. We just look at Europe, inside Europe, and that's all there is to it. We try systematically to counter this at the STG. Poliana is from Brazil. She focuses on innovation. We just had another event the other day on democratic backsliding with the Obama Foundation, and you told us all the things you worry about, we did them in Brazil. So you should look out a bit more. So tell us, how do you view this from Brazil?
Hello, everybody. I'm very honored to be here in this panel with you all. And my view as an outsider and living here in Florence for 5 months, and when I came here, I brought in my baggage mindset of what I want to do here. It's a regulatory sandbox. But then when I started to talk with people and live in the city, I was, okay, maybe what I need to do here is to bring a little bit of other perspectives in how we can do innovation. because my feeling was Europe is stuck. They are in a long and years of bureaucracy, and they're not very worried about China, United States, and not thinking inside what's the real problems and what we can do to make innovations. But for us to do innovation, my country, Brazil, has a lot of social issues. And for us, innovation is a way to survive. So in our blood, in our cultural aspects, we need to do some innovations, being creative, for us to make a living, for us to survive the odds, because we do not have, there's a lot of external aspects that influence our governments, that influencing even our mindset with colonialism mindset and imperialist mindset that we needed to broke. And in 20 years, we started to, okay, we do have our own mindset of what is technology, what is innovation. And we only started to rethinking and remodeling what is our power and soft power in a global scenario when we start to reconnect with our originary people from the rainforest, people that was there before the invasion that our land had. So maybe, in my aspect, Europe has a lot of knowledge. There is huge and real good institutions. There are a lot of brains that are capable of thinking and innovating, but it's stuck to the past, looking to the future, and doing nothing in the present. So maybe, and also everybody calls, oh, Brussels effect, Brussels effect. Okay, it's Brussels, but you can, even here in STG, EUI, in some institutions, not even, doesn't need to be an academic institutions, but we have a plenty of opportunities to create environments and territories that we can put a little bit of the startups, skylabs, and technology mindset that let's be more experimental, let's create some territory like a sandbox that we can emulate some problems, and in this environment we can try to navigate to those problems. So we have, in Europe, I see tons of youth people that already has the mentality that, oh, I want to be a policymaking, but they don't want to be entrepreneurs. I want, like, oh, how can we bring Uber to Europe? Why you want Uber in Europe? Why don't you create even your technology? And why you want Uber? Uber is not a good model of anything. So I think you're lost a little bit of what your strength, what you're capable of. And in the paper, I was the Renaissance, and yeah, where's the cultural aspect in the paper? Where is the people? You know, I felt this lacking. I want to hear what the youth talked about the future. Oh, in the future, Europe will be not growing enough and anything. We are in an economical system that it will be impossible only growth because we have limited resources. So why we are not talking about how can we be sustainable, but not in this growth exponential mindset, because it will be realistic. So that's my my crew.
Thank you so much. Exactly on point. So we were consulting because, of course, Nicola and Luis have some things to reply. George also wanted to say something, but we only have about half an hour until 7 p.m. when we will have a reception. We might be in decline, but we decline in style. So I would like to open the floor for questions and remarks. And so Simon first. Yeah, there is. It's coming.
Great panel. Thank you very much. Simon Hicks from up the hill in the other branch of the EUI and former colleague of Luis from LSE. I find this fascinating, but as a political scientist, I would say the politics is missing, right? So how would you get this through? I mean, I'm quite sympathetic to the diagnosis. I'm quite sympathetic to the agenda, but from someone who studies politics in the EU, this can only happen if there is a kind of quid pro quo, a package deal of some kind. So how do you persuade people like George, sort of centre-left, sensible centre-left, to actually come on board? What are you going to give them in return as part of this package to get what you want?
Thank you. And incidentally, 3 of the 5 discussants are from the centre-left. Just
oh, and Dario, of course.
Yes. The gentleman on the right.
Thanks. Jonathan Zeitlin. I'm a visiting fellow at the Schumann Center. I want to come back to this question about the evidence base for the claim that there is a real causal connection between EU regulation on the one hand and Europe's performance in terms of innovation, competitiveness, and productivity. I heard a lot from the panelists and also in your manifesto about the Draghi Report. But when you read the Draghi Report very carefully, you find actually that the evidence base for these kinds of claims is very weak, often very anecdotal. And when you go into the footnotes, you find that the sources often don't say what the Draghi Report derives. Let me give you a couple of, I think, important examples. So one of the most quoted headline claims in the Draghi Report is that 60% of European businesses consider regulation to be a major barrier to investment. And then you look and say, well, where does this come from? It comes from a survey done by the European Investment Bank. And the first thing when you go to that, you find is that less than half of those considered it to be a major problem, and they considered other problems to be more important. Then you also find that a similar survey was conducted by the EIB at the same time, and a higher proportion of American firms considered regulation to be a major barrier to investment. So obviously, causally, it can't be an explanatory factor for divergence between the two polities. Similarly, you find the claim that 52% of SMEs consider regulation to be one of their biggest problems, again, in terms of investment. When you go and look at the study in question, you find that it's a non-representative survey conducted by the European Commission during the pandemic, and that 50% of the respondents came from 3 countries, Italy, Spain, and Belgium. So what can you do with that? And even, let's take something that's cited in your manifesto, which Nicolas just referred to, which is, the studies of the GDPR. So I was interested, I went and read the studies. First of all, the figures you quote are about the short-term reaction to the GDPR.
I would need you to close because there are many others.
Okay, I'll just...
Thank you.
And secondly, that the same people did another study that you also cite, which shows that a major effect was to shift from direct investment to investment through syndicates because of the greater need for local knowledge. So, I would just say that a lot of this looks not like real evidence that supports an analysis, but something that seems to be taken to illustrate positions that people hold already. And we would really want to see a better evidence-based such sweeping.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry
no
for
worries.
being long.
We will take, yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
I will do. I will then, since there are already two rather heavy questions, I would start with taking a round of answers. Maybe Nicolas, you start because you have a long list, and maybe then some of our panelists want to reply as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to be short. So I want to get back on the point that Poliana made about where are the people, right? And where are the people in Europe that want to build Uber? So, you know, as economists like Bengt and Luis understand very well, incentives matter. And you know, I would submit here that the problem is that these people don't build Ubers because the incentive structure in Europe is missing for that, right? And that ties to the point that Lucia was making, that, you know, property rights are not properly monetized. The market, the product and service markets to which you have access are too small, and the money markets in which you can tap are so narrow and shallow that you need to go to state money, and states are fiscally constrained. So absent a proper economically sensible set of incentives, you won't see the people build the Ubers that Europe needs, right? And so that's why you don't see the people in our manifesto, because we talk about incentives in the old economic tradition. So that's the first point. Second point is, I think we can pick, you know, studies here and there and find that, you know, some show this and some show that and this and that. And I think, as Luis has very thoroughly established on his blog, and I did that with my students actually 2 days ago, we studied 2 papers on GDPR, papers on the diversion of resources in firms. So firms in Europe that comply to GDPR, instead of investing in compute and data analysis, right? They invest in compliance, right? There's a diversion ratio. And the problem is not that, you know, the diversion ratio doesn't exist in the United States. That's not what we say. But we say that because we don't have the money markets that America has, the cost of regulation are differentially higher for European businesses. And this is a subtle point, but it's the key point. So it's not like, hey, you know, it's all regulation, but if you start from a base in which the money markets are not pouring a ton of capital in your business organization, and you just face these walls of regulation, you start on the back foot, right? And you don't want to be there. So that's, I think, what we want to say.
I would like to add just very quickly. So I forgot to say the GDP numbers to George. I mean, it's true that Europe as a whole grows differently than Europe, core Europe. We've had a huge convergence of the Eastern European states, and that explains some of the growth. If you look at the GDP growth of core Europe, it is 1 point lower at the very least every decade since the 1980s. So this is a fact. I'm happy to stand on it and discuss it if necessary. On the factual basis of the analysis and whether it's cherry picked, I think we can converge on there is no software. There are very few software businesses in Europe. That's quite clear. This is a fact. There is no AI businesses in Europe. There's Mistral. The French government announced yesterday they were deploying 30 million for AI. It's a complete joke. I mean, the numbers we're talking about are ridiculous. On the second prima facie evidence that I want to offer is there is huge excess savings in Europe. There is a lot of savings that are going to the US. There's excess human talent in Europe. There's a lot of very smart people. They're moving to the US, and as very well Leta said, the US is funding with European savers' money, European entrepreneurs doing businesses in the US. That is prima facie evidence that the market is not scaling up and that people are not finding the opportunities. Now, Simon is asking the core question, which is, we're not just going to convince our friends to just change. I understand politics very much. I think that, and he's right, I think that there are certain things that we should agree. And I think the point about enforcement is important. Is it less Europe? I mean, when the Commission decides to try to be a political Europe, it decides to give up on enforcing. Because if you want to do politics, it's going to have the states on board, and then they have to be nice to the states. And that's what Ursula von der Leyen has been doing, being nice to the states on the fiscal rules and on the single market rules. The enforcement actions have plummeted. Can we get our friends to agree on all across the spectrum that enforcement should go up? Yes. Can we agree also that the 27 are not going to move on foreign policy and security and on defense, and we cannot be slaves to Orban? I would hope yes, and that means we're going to have to move to coalitions of the willing. So on those things, I think we can agree. I mean, I am regretful and despondent that in spite of the Omnibus 1, it was agreed, Omnibus 1 was agreed, it was voted down by the left in Parliament. We can hear about that. It was agreed originally, and then when it went to the vote, the Socialist Party kind of broke apart, and it didn't vote it. Eventually, the decision by the BPE to pass it with the extreme right, or with part of the extreme right, not with the, I mean, whatever. It's not great at all, but I mean, we need change. And I think the priority has to be change. I hope the center coalition of which I was part holds. But if the center coalition doesn't, I mean, if the center coalition wants to talk, it should discuss what are the principles for this new, dynamic, innovative Europe, and not try to preserve the status quo that is not working. That's my view.
Thank you so much, Luis. There were two quick answers or interventions from Lucia and from... okay.
Okay. Thank you. The point regarding the Draghi Report. So the Draghi Report has its sources. I think these sources are limited, as you say, because the reality is much stronger than what the sources say. We in Confindustria have regular meetings with French Confindustria, the MEDEF, with the German BDI, with the Spanish Industrial Association, and we have our representative in Brussels, which is Business Europe. The point is exactly the same. Regulation is killing our capabilities of being competitive. And you know what happens to those which are not competitive in the world. Sooner or later, they die. So we're seeing that we have lost already many areas of business which are there to be the future of the world, and we are kept out because we have not been able to have the rules and the push. Also money from banks, which are regulated also on their part. And it is all a wheel where wherever you look, there are aspects that are over-regulated when compared to the US and China and very soon India. We will see the impact soon of these big areas of the world growing. China is tremendously innovative. They are creating innovation in all areas, including capability of working design areas, which has traditionally been one of our strong areas. Europe has been able to destroy its main industrial sector, which is automotive, which was also the one which was investing more in research. So the point is not having a court case against what's happened until now, but to have a different view for the future, because I totally agree that otherwise, the extreme right wing will take the rule of next commission.
Thank you, Lucia. I want to make sure, Bengt, would you like to say anything, or you're just enjoying the show?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the show, but yes, I just want to come back to the fact that what worries me the most is that we are not, at our age, we really need to worry about the young people. I mean, and this attitude that we have comfortable for, I mean, nobody has mentioned even the fact that we have no defense in Europe, really, seriously. I mean, this could wipe out the whole welfare state of Europe because you don't have a state anymore. I mean, Europe somehow has managed to use all the money that other places like China and the US have spent on their armies. It's unfortunate it has to be done, Europe has gotten away with a massive benefit from not having to do that. I mean, there are exceptions like Finland and the border policies, but you have to think about that too. And then the second thing is that I mean, the funding or the scale up for innovators, which is really one of the most critical problems, they go to US because they can't be funded properly, and the scale ups cannot be funded in Europe. That's just a massively serious problem. And the more the geopolitics heats up, you know, we can really be missing a lot of key pieces that we need here in Europe. And I'm speaking of European because I'm only a European. I'm not an American citizen. So I have a right to say, speak on behalf of Europe. And you know, it's somehow that's just enormously worrying. At the same time, I must say that I've been very inspired by the young people, at least in the Nordic countries, the enthusiasm for, you know, innovation. But they eventually hit the wall because they can't scale it up, and you know, I fear that that's going to maybe. I mean, I was at the Slush event this year in Finland, and that was a major concern for the startup communities. That nothing has happened really. The innovation has stalled because of the scale-up problems. So, I think I guess I'm directing it mainly this to George. That I understand George wanted to be provocative, but I worry that you may not really take seriously what is really a massive issue.
Thank you. So I know you want to intervene, but there are 3 more people. I would like them to raise questions, and then you can come back for the last round. So I will start with Alex, my TA, and actually a PhD student from law, so he's a poster child.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. So very interesting talk, paper which I read. I wanted to go back to the question of innovation, right? Because that's really central to the discussion, and it's obvious that, you know, the EU is lagging behind in AI like quite dramatically. It's like I think we can all agree on that point, and that's a very personal thing for me because like one of my best friends actually went to the US to work on AI-powered research. So we discussed about that topic a lot together. And he keeps lamenting that the EU doesn't have any infrastructure to help him go back to the EU and work in the EU. But what's interesting is that he never talks to me about the fact that the EU is overregulated. What he talks to me about all the time is that we don't invest money in it, that we don't have any public plans to invest in AI. So I was kind of surprised because the paper, I feel like, talks about growth quite a lot and makes proposals to increase sort of general growth. But it's also written Constitution of Innovation, and you talk a lot about improving innovation in Europe, but my understanding of how you improve innovation is it's by having public programs that are that target innovative sectors and that, you know, channel money and talents to to those sectors. So how do you see that yourselves?
Very good question, Alex. Thanks. Calypso.
So, Calypso Nicolaitis from this place. I was wondering what the cost of calling it Manifesto might be. I mean, it's really cool when academics do that, you know, we make it exciting, wow, cool, revolutionaries. But of course, isn't the danger a bit that you kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater and simply the way in which we love as academics to always ask, under what condition can I make this argument? To take 3 examples from the questions, you know, so George raised venture capital. And you, Nicola, you very rightly kind of push back against all those who are saying, oh, they're just deregulators, that's your simple story, manifesto story. No, smarter regulation. But then you kind of like on AI and all of these things, you can think, well, isn't the real issue the culture of risk in Europe? A bit echoing your venture capital, you know, we've been telling this story forever. Is this really about above all regulation. I mean, there's part of it, venture capital is in part a function of regulation, but is it, or is it not something deeper about the culture of risk? And the risky Europeans then go to the US. So you're putting too much, you know, on regulation. Or Dario's question, you know, isn't there a contradiction between the moment you say, well, you know, we should have regulation and not directives which allow for customization at the national level, but you also say diversity, therefore mutual recognition. Now, you know, if you are going to mutually recognize rules in Europe, regulating services and goods and all the rest of it, then, you know, it's not regulation. It's not one standard, one regulation. So there is a tension here, and that what we then do is ask, you know, under what condition should we have mutual recognition, managed recognition, standardization, regulation, da-da-da-da-da. And then the Poliana finally, I was wondering, Luis, why did you just regret that the omnibus was stopped in the EP by these dangerous leftists? No, I know you don't think that, but because actually what was the problem is that Ursula von der Leyen has done away with impact assessment, and Dario was saying this very rightly, and transparency and democratic accountability. And I know that Poliana is the only person who talked about the people, democracy. You won't be surprised that I'm going to bring this on, but isn't that another angle on the remedies, that a democratic panopticon, the people watch, and the omnibus was trying to get away with it? I would argue that if you have much more radical transparency, the radicality of sunlight in the EU, you will have better and smarter regulations, because the people are pretty smart in general. So 3 examples of less manifesto type.
Thank you. Was there another question there? Yes, and then we take a round of replies starting from the discussants.
Yeah, and I had some remarks on George.
Short, though.
It was the PISA results are down. If you look at mathematics,
the PISA results.
PISA, yeah. You see the youth health, when it comes to obesity, mental health is decreasing. Well, it's increasing, I mean. Fertility rates are also at low rates. So what does that tell about the younger generation? Because I think that a society that thrives is when young people thrive and when they progress. And at this society now, we see among many European countries, the young people are not thriving anymore. If you look at employment rates for a youngster, it's very high. So how do we solve that? And secondly, I was wondering, what do we do with the educational system? Is an educational system where people study for 5, 6, 7 years, is that a good society? Could we do something with the educational system that people can study 1, 2 years and get into? And thirdly, who are the? We don't have any. We don't have Angela Merkel anymore. But who is the big leader in Europe now? Because I think that we need a big European leader who can, compete against Xi Jinping. But who is that today?
So the first 2 questions, we all agree. The third, I'm afraid we are not going to agree. But okay. There are many questions, but I would like... Is it short, Alain? Yeah, now you have to promise me. You have to promise me. Okay.
That sometimes people who are in a difficulty become more creative, right? And I think that I've seen that in Africa very often too. We see that in Ukraine. They didn't have a defense sector, but the war created the necessity to be creative. So to rebound on the question of Prosecco, right? Prosecco, we all have our Prosecco despite the lack of growth and innovation. As long as we keep our Prosecco, is there any chance that we will be creative and have growth? So do we need these situations of crisis to suddenly realize we need to do something? And it's the COVID, etc. Right? So I hope it was short enough.
It was very good. Thanks so much. Is it also very short? And then we take a final round of replies. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm David Chiaramonti, Polytechnic Torino, and Clean Energy Ministerial Platform. I'm chairing for Italy a 25-country work stream of the Clean Energy Ministerial. So we have a quite broad view from outside Europe. And actually, I really appreciated the discussion. We normally work in policy regulation, but there's one point I'm missing in the discussion today. What went wrong? And my personal analysis and what I hear from Brazil, from India, from China, from US, from some other European countries, is the lack of industrial culture, what also Dario and Lucia mentioned. I mean, in developing regulation, there's a lack of understanding of industry. I could make thousands of examples of European regulation, just make one, and I conclude. The CO2 regulation in this moment address the energy sector, the automotive sector, and the green steel sector. And this is done in closed-door rooms in Brussels. And there's a lack of exchange. And you see what is happening with CBAM. Now, a big issues on CBAM. Everybody, Italian steel industries are very preoccupied by that, but not only. So I would like to hear a bit from the speakers what went wrong and why this has happened, and if we can recover it.
Thank you so much. Okay, we had a large range of views, and I would like to give the floor back to the discussants first, starting with Erkki.
But I just make one comment what Bengt said. The issue about defense, security, internal market, Europe is critical for the future. And I just propose you big item for your school, one of the item. I'm chairing Bruegel. I'm not doing this report, but they have done great papers about how you must combine deep internal market, make it broader, research and financing. It will be our destiny. And that's also critical for growth, because I'm in US. Defense industries are an important part there, and we must do it ourselves. So contact Bruegel, they will be great partners for you on this item.
Thank you so much. Does, Poliana, do you want to say something?
I'm going to share with you guys. We, in Brazil, we have, in order we start to create startups and more innovative with technology mindset, but also putting our cultural aspects in everything. We created some areas in Brazil with less regulatory and bureaucracy for us to emulate some situations that we can push past some of bigger issues that the country has. And because of the pandemic, we started a really fast process in more digital transformation inside the public sector. And because of that, we started to, in the universities, in public schools, in each level, even the youth to the oldest in our city, we brought together some and how they use the technology for them be more participative in a democratic ways. And because of that, we start to have a little bit of more data in how they want us as a public sector, how to innovate. And because of that, we have a new new law for innovation specifically, so I can share with you
example
in the near
Thanks
future.
so much. Does Dario or Lucia want to say something?
Only one reflection on the leadership. The main problem is that we don't have any real strong leaders in Europe. That's all.
Thank you.
Maybe I also play with these words. The point is we need leaders who connect the dots. So we now mentioned that we need more defense. We see kind of risk on our east side. And so how do we work to make the industry, defense, to become an industry? What do we do with the steel industry? Is it important or not? Do we make planes for our defense with paper or with steel? If we make them with steel, we need to help the steel industry. We must get rid of all the CBAM, all the problems that we have created to that industry. So connect the dots.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Let's get something straight. Nobody's complacent here. Okay? We all agree Europe needs to grow more, be more innovative. There's absolutely no question about this. I mean, we were all on board here. I'm a Negroni man myself, so, but you know, the Prosecco analogy I think is completely wrong. Nobody is here in sort of thinking, you know, let's all go and have Prosecco and whatever. But there are 3 points I'd like to make, which I think are important in this conversation. One, we need to distinguish between national and European regulation. Lucia, the reason why Italy has not grown its GDP per capita between 2000 and 2024, like my country, right? Greece is in the same problem, has nothing to do with the EU regulation, has a lot to do with how it regulates itself, national regulations and many other characteristics. Let's not always look at EU regulation as being the reason why, because, you know, Spain grew by 21% GDP per capita. I know, but we are, you know, a lot of your examples were about Italy, this is why. So I think it's important, as a general rule, I think it's important to make a clear distinction between regulations. Some of the real regulatory problem is in national countries, it's not at the level of the EU. Second point, trade-offs. That's a really good point that Nicola made in the very beginning, or Luis, I think talking about the green growth, and yeah, Luis, we cannot say that, you know, there are no. In a similar way, there are also perhaps some trade-offs between wanting the kind of insecurity that gives the risk and allows people to go out and do things, and the kind of stuff that we use. So we shouldn't be, you know, sort of putting this aside. We should bring it out. And then there is a democratic process through which people can decide and maybe bear the consequences if they decide something that we're not. Third, services. Absolutely, we have a fragmented market. To actually challenge the number does not mean to challenge that the market is fragmented and much more in services. But there, I think, there's always the cost-benefit issue. GDPR, of course, increases compliance. And of course, if we had less GDPR, people would have resources but compared with other things, and venture capital and capital markets and financing is the obvious one, is GDPR the real thing that is keeping us back? So I think these are not to doubt the direction or the need and the urgency. These are to sort of fine-tune a little bit the way that we look at some things. That's all.
Thank you so much. Then I would ask one last word from the three authors, starting with Bengt, if he's still online, and then we conclude with you guys.
Why don't I go live?
Okay, what did he say? You don't go up, but we hear you, so it's okay. No, you muted yourself. No, I mean we were hearing you. That's fine. All right. Let's see if he comes back later.
What did you have a question or?
Well, no. If you had one last word to share with us, otherwise we can move on to Luis and there you are, and Nicola. You have one last word.
I have a lot of things I could share with you, but I think this has been a good discussion. I really think. I hope, you know, people realize that there's an America and a China that really is rushing forward with AI, and you have to go there and see to realize that that's something else than that's happening in Europe, and that's just I feel, and India and, you know, South America, Europe is really stagnant with regard to innovation. Even though they are very enthusiastic about the startups. I mean, the numbers invested in you know, there's no platforms, there's so much missing here, and there's so much on the table. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I think we have to give the young people a chance, and we are not doing it right now.
Guys.
Okay. So I'm going to go to Calypso's question. We didn't call this a manifesto. I think there's some PR activity here that has socialized this on networks. As a manifesto, we would have called this an essay or a statement or a declaration, une tribune. This could have worked equally. The point that I hear across the room is, why are you so hard on the EU, and why are you so hard on regulation, right? And so I want to make this extremely simple and clear. The one area in which the EU has power is rulemaking, making laws, governance, right? That's very clear. And markets are constructed. So we want the EU to take its mandates in market design and market management very seriously. That's what we say. That occasionally imply more EU regulation, that occasionally imply more national regulation, right? But it's certainly not anti-regulation or anti-EU. The system of multi-level governance that we have today, that has emerged from practice, is impractical, inconsequential, and almost crazy sometimes. So that's what we say.
So I want to finish with a call for action. So to your point about your friend. So my two sons are in America. My little son is going to start a PhD in computer science next year. So if you can guess which universities he could apply to, they're all in the US except for 2 universities in the UK and 1 university in Switzerland. I mean, shockingly, right? If you try to think, where can you study computer science today? No European Union university fits in the bill. You have to go to Switzerland, to the UK, or to the US, of course, to China. Okay, so I agree that this is depressing. What I think is also depressing is to say that this 600 billion has to come from the state. It's not going to come. The way we're going to solve the innovation problem is not by bringing out the checkbook. That's not the states. I think my first slide should have been clear on that. The resources of the states. I mean, Amazon is spending 5 times more than the German government. Amazon, one company, 5 times more than the German government. I mean, start adding other companies, start adding NVIDIA and Microsoft. The amount of resources that have to be mobilized for this are enormous. And I want to finish with what Bengt said. The AI revolution is a big deal. I think it's the biggest deal we're going to see in our lives by a mile. And if you have been following what happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks, if you haven't, go ahead and follow it, okay? There's been new versions of Claude, new versions of ChatGPT, there's been a new version of Gemini, and the things are getting agentic and things are accelerating very fast. If Europe is nowhere in this arena, we are putting a lot at risk. So I think what I want to say is, really, as Bengt said, let's take this really very serious.
Indeed. Well, thank you so very much for a rich, stimulating discussion. I feared when we said we would organize a reception, it would be like the orchestra on the Titanic, but this feels a lot more, if not optimistic, I felt the passion and a feisty energy about doing something for Europe, despite differences in the diagnosis. So thank you very much for joining us and for participating. And see you at the courtroom on the other side. Very broad range.